I'm Cameron Hepburn, Professor of Environmental Economics and Director of the Smith School of Enterprise and the Environment at the University of Oxford. And it's a pleasure to reflect on the amount of progress that has been made over the course of the last 3 years since the Saracen Climate Active Fund was launched, because there has actually been an awful lot. I mean, in the last 3 years, the concept of net zero has really properly established itself. It's so well established now that it's kind of hard to believe that it was only a few years before Saracen launched that I found myself, at the World Economic Forum, meeting world leaders and arguing with them about whether this was accepted science and even a good communications idea. And of course it is both. And since then, we've now had one economic grouping after another, commit to net zero, the EU, now China, and soon the US on a federal level. And it's very clear that this is not only where the world has to head, but it is where the world is going to head. And now the only question is how fast. We know that getting to net zero by 2050 is a huge undertaking across multiple systems, and none of this is going to be easy. But we also know that there's a set of stepping stones along the way. Clean up your electricity system, electrify a lot of the economy. For the bits that you can't electrify, make sure you're using clean molecules like hydrogen from electrolysis. Go hard on efficiency across all areas, industrial and buildings and the rest of us. And we're going to need a transformation of food and agricultural systems as well. And the economics of all of these transformations are improving now incredibly quickly. There's a positive story here from multiple angles, and partly this is due to the self-reinforcing dynamics that we're seeing coming into play here. So it's not really surprising that investing in this transformation has already been rewarding, as the Saracen Climate Active Fund has shown. And I think investing in these themes will continue to be rewarding for the coming years and, I dare say, decades. If we first have a look at some of the detail of the progress since Paris, here the Climate Action Tracker report just released in December shows that since Paris and since the 3 years of the Climate Active Fund, we've had big increases in ambition and in fact in implemented policies around net zero. So you can peruse that slide at your leisure. It's quite a good one. But the bottom line is that while 5 years ago we were looking at temperatures well over 3 degrees, we're now in a situation where if all of the countries of the world deliver on their net zero announcements, we are within spitting distance of a 2-degree target. Now, of course, Paris, the agreement looks for well below 2 degrees, aiming at 1.5, so we're not there yet. But this is starting to feel like a story heading in the right direction, whereas it hasn't for the last 20 years, I dare say. So let me take you through some of the dynamics at play here. And if you take a system, whether it's a socioeconomic system or a physical system, here actually an ice sheet is part of a system, you can get these reinforcing dynamics in systems where once things start to happen, they really take off exponentially. We heard mid last year that there was some risk that this ice sheet would now be lost irretrievably, because as the temperatures warm, the ice obviously melts. You'd have to cool the Earth to 1 degree below where we were pre-industrially to get those sorts of sheets back. Now, it's not going to happen immediately, but these sorts of dynamics are nasty, and they're in the system. And you could spend a long time, and many of my colleagues happily at Oxford do, studying the mathematics and the dynamics of these systems, but it's enough to know that they play out as well in socioeconomic systems. Here, of course, the collapse of the Berlin Wall, where a set of small changes triggered massive changes, including in the fall of a system of thought, effectively, and radical changes across the economies of Eastern Europe. So this positive feedback is very important in social systems. It's particularly important in the transformations that we're seeing towards a net zero future. And we could spend a lot of time together going through the sheer array of different positive feedbacks there are on this path to net zero. I put 9 in front of you now, thinking about technology. More deployment of clean technology leads to it becoming cheaper, which means you want to deploy it more. A causes B causes A. The same thing can happen on beliefs. If more people think that we're going to get to net zero, then they'll behave in certain ways that actually make net zero more likely. So these beliefs can be self-fulfilling. And across the list here, finance, geopolitics, business, network economics, legal liabilities, even personal preferences and choices about food and diets, all are going to add up, I think, to an increasingly rapid acceleration as time passes. So what do these pathways potentially look like? Well, if we're going to get to net zero kind of on time, well below 2 degrees of warming and within a reasonable shot at 1.5, then we need very sharply declining emissions over the next decade. And we're also going to need some greenhouse gas removal technologies at the end of the decade. That's a large, as yet nascent field. But it's worth keeping an eye on, because what we're talking about here is the growth of an industry in 3 decades that basically is as big as the oil and gas industry today, kind of operating in reverse, taking the carbon out of the air and putting it back underground. And at Oxford, we're taking particular interest in this space as well. So that's the picture in front of you for the world as a whole from the IPCC, various illustrative pathways there to get to 1.5 degrees with or without overshoot. In the UK, you can see here, these pathways are fixed by law now. The carbon budgets, which the Committee on Climate Change provides advice about, are legislated, and then the government is held to account to deliver on a plan to get there. Now, of course, the government's not always on track with these plans. It's met all 3 of the budgets so far, but without further action, looks like missing budgets in the future. So, but of course, part of the institutional structure is designed to ensure that it is under pressure to deliver. Now, what needs to happen to get to net zero, as I said earlier, is much clearer. Lots of efficiency there in purple, take up of low carbon solutions, electricity, hydrogen, and carbon capture, expansion of that low carbon energy, and then some offsets. And we're now in a point in time where a company such as Shell feels compelled to have, and it is sensible for it to have, scenarios that are around the 1.5 to 2 to a bit over 2 kind of mark in terms of warming. All signals that we're heading on the right track. So what are the opportunities for investors? Clearly, the first thing you should do is make sure that you are holding high carbon stocks with caution, and ideally with some sort of sense that you can be transformational and agents for change in their pathways. Of course, the Saracen team have been doing over the last 3 years in their very intelligent and activist way. But also there are these other clean technologies that we know are going to grow exponentially, whether it's high efficiency forms of renewable energy, electrolysis, some of the other industries that need reshaping, like the steel and the cement industry. And of course, once we've got lots of hydrogen that is clean, that can be used with captured CO2 to produce other products and potentially even synthetic foods. And you know the story about cellular agriculture and plant-based alternative proteins. So these kind of stories in food, in energy, are simply going to accelerate. It's an exciting time to be investing. Thank you very much.